Welcome to Get Big Out Loud Radio, where we explore living the complex, funny, and beautiful ride of life with me, Kari Knutson, and Dr. Pat on transformationtalkradio.com. Are your thoughts keeping you small? Are you ready to get big? I will offer you ideas to transform what you are thinking into conscious action. Explore what is keeping you small and how to shift your behaviors in order to get big. Learn what is possible for you. Get ready to get big and live life out loud starting now.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. What a great show we have for you today. Kari Knutson. First of all, I've known Kari now for quite a few years. And I have to say this, today's show is called The Currency of Trust. And I can't wait till we talk about this, because I've watched and learned from Kari what it is like to step out in faith, what that currency is. What does that mean? Currency of trust. Now, I will say for myself that I have studied this topic. I may even pull a couple of quotes from the topic, but in the world we're living in today, I think trust has gone bust. That's just my 2 cents on it. So today, the most amazing, Kari Knutson, who is you just heard it, professional speaker. She was a school counselor, bumped herself out in the world, full-time speaking, coaching, storyteller, mom. We haven't done the closet wrap thing yet, but we're going to do it. And she's an extrovert. So this extrovert is helping this introvert. Yes, don't be shocked. I really am an introvert. Get out in the world in a better way. Now, why is trust playing a role in this? Because Kari is also an expert in emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, emotions are triggered immensely by trust, distrust, mistrust, whatever you want to call it. Kari, great topic. All right, go ahead. Give me the skinny. Why did this come up for you today?
I first have to say trust is bust should be a bumper sticker. I think that's like a off the cuff. Trust is bust. And I always pick topics that are coming up for me in my own life and I'm thinking about it because it's relevant. And this month it came up for me because I was really thinking about how things work in relationships where there's trust and how things don't work in relationships where there isn't trust. And I was doing a talk around boundaries for a group, and I was surprised how much trust came up with how we feel about our boundaries. And so I really was starting to think about this more, like, what is it about trust that helps move things along and move things along, and what is it when it doesn't? And I thought about currency in terms of like money helps us get things done, right? When we have it, we can use it the way we want, things can happen. Also, the way money works, we want it, we want to keep it, we want to have it in abundance, we want to feel like it's secure. It makes us feel secure that we can do things that we need, right? And I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's just like trust. We want to keep it, earn it, have it in abundance. It helps things in our lives work better. And so the currency of trust, it made me think about this natural connection to how we think about getting things done with money, to how we get things done with trust, and how it is a huge factor in every relationship we engage with, that we have. And so that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I thought it's worth a deep dive into how it looks when it gets broken, how we repair it, how we build it. And in a world that is seemingly becoming less trustful, how do we change the narrative around that, one person at a time, to be the deciders in terms of, I'm making a decision to think about trust, and am I extending it or not? Am I willing to? Why or why not?
And let's just be clear to everybody out there. We're not making this up. So I just want to let everybody know that's watching the show. You're going to hear Kari and I talk about trust, maybe in ways that you have or have not heard before. For me, Kari, you know this about me, my research, post-research, the thing that I get excited about understanding more about are agreements. They're called psychological contracts. They're called promises. And they're exchanges. There's so many different exchanges. You mentioned money. Money is a form of exchange. So what happens with money by itself is just money. It's like money, that song. it's just money. But when you have money and a person, there
Yeah.
is an exchange. So money is a great example. Why? Because it's the thing that most of us need to sustain life. Now, unless you're like a couple of my friends, they're like out back in it somewhere. I don't know where they are because they don't have a phone. They're like up on some mountain somewhere. They don't need the money. They're living off the land. But the idea of trust is so fundamentally important in every exchange, whether you're in a love, whether you're in a work, whether you're just walking down the street and you say hi to somebody, it doesn't matter. There's a level of trust that impacts us all. And that's why when you sent this in today, I was really excited because you're not leaving anything out, are you?
No, I'm trying to be all encompassing when I'm saying it's trust. If you look at any aspect of your life and think about the role trust plays in it, and it could be from the fact that in this country we use banks and another country they don't. We trust that when I go to the bank and I put my money in there, that it will be there and it will stay there, and then the terms of the interest are clear, right? I also drop my kids off at school. And some level, I'm trusting that institution and those teachers and the work that they do there. I'm trusting what will happen there, like that. I believe that that's a good option, right? And then I go to my doctor, and I'm trusting what she's telling me, and we're having that conversation. The level of trust in her expertise and her profession is something I'm trusting. When I talk to my husband about things that we're doing, like trusting what we're saying and how we're communicating, like all levels of our lives are impacted by trust. And I think we tend to think of trust in friendships first, but we don't tend to think about trust in our work relationships and in other areas of our lives as much. We tend to default to that. So the reason I didn't leave anything out is I wanted to talk about trust, big capital T, trust in all aspects of our life, and not talk about it in terms of only relationships where we like a friendship, right? Like that. I want to talk about it with a broader stroke today.
So let's just talk about what trust is. Give us a rundown from where you sit. Give us what trust is about, right? Before we go to trust and bust or crust bust,
Trust.
because I'm telling you, you got to crust bust your way all around trust. Well,
Oh,
actually, you got to crust bust it around mistrust. But take us on a journey about what trust is about from where you sit.
okay, so I wrote this down, so I want to make sure I read it right.
Yeah.
I was saying about the things that trust encompasses. Trust and confidence encompasses confidence or a belief, assurance, faith, certainty, conviction, reliance, any of those words, either in ourselves or in other people. So when you think about those words, again, I'm going to say it: confidence, belief, assurance, faith, certainty, conviction, reliance. Those are big things, whether either in ourselves or other people. And that's what to me is involving trust. And when you think about the opposite of that, when you think about things like distrust, skepticism, evidence, or investigation, those things have a very opposite. And like even when you talk about those things, that how we approach things that need to be like, I don't totally believe you. Tell me more. I need more evidence, right? Versus like confidence or assurance. So I wanted to. It's hard for me to totally define like this is the actual, when we think about trust. I wanted to think about more of how we feel with that reliance, assurance kind of feeling when we're in relationships where trust exists. We have the assurance. We feel like we can rely on it. There's some amount of safety. There's some amount of confidence. And we have to take that to live our lives. We cannot question everything all the time. Trust has to be a given in some relationships so that we can function. And that's important to think about. Like our functioning depends on trust. And also then how we feel about our functioning. Like I can function in mistrust, but I don't feel good about it. I don't want to like take all my time. You know, when people are in like in places where they don't trust, or relationships that don't trust, that's when people say document everything. You know, make sure you write everything down. That's when like contracts get really long and involved because we're like making sure we cover CYA. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. You can tell where the energy shifts, but can you live your whole life doing that all the time? Like you cannot be free to live your without trust.
Yeah. I mean, I took a look getting ready for this show, and I had to do a refresher on some of my own research, by the way. And I just went to my dissertation alone, not even my postdoctorate. And I either mention research or have outcomes for trust 227 times.
Whoa.
Right. And so if it's so important, why do we abuse trust? Right? You understand. Now, that's a harsh word, because I think we need to be a little bit harsh when it comes to talking about trust, because I don't know about you, but I think what I've learned in my own life, having been on both sides, having been the offended and the offender, both.
Mhm.
And I learned more from being the offender, like the person that, oh, I don't trust you anymore, right? Being that. Now, I've learned more in my life. For example, I learned not to be late anymore. I used to be like a chronic late, like late. Oh, what? Tell Pat an hour before. Maybe she'll show up an hour later. But I realized how disrespectful that was. And that was a bunch of years ago. That may seem small to the audience today, because there are much more complicated things we'll talk about today, but it's still something that offends people. So let's talk about what trust impacts for a minute, what it does, and where do we plug it? Like, what do we trust? Do we trust the tree? Do we trust the sky? Do we trust the weather? No, we don't. Because nobody can predict the weather. Every 5 minutes here in the Pacific Northwest, the weather is changing. But there are some things, what do we trust in that are non-negotiable from where you sit?
So it's so interesting to think, like, do we trust that tree's not going to fall down? Do we trust the laws of physics? Right? Like, to be like, where's gravity? Like, so it's interesting because some things it's assumed trust, like my roof is going to stay on. I'm assuming, that it was put on properly, and that they, like, in some situations you assume trust. Or like when I go to the grocery store and the food that I buy, I'm assuming that there's no recall on it, or that it's not tainted, or that it went through the proper channels from the Food and Drug Administration, so that I can drink my milk and not worry about it. Right. And so that level of trust, that's why when you see a recall on something, or like in our cars, we get a recall on our car, or recall on food, we're like, it's scary, because you have that idea of like some things you just trust. And you have to, in order to, again, to live our lives, and institutions work hard to build that trust, so that we're not constantly questioning everything. Because the earning of the trust and the keeping of the trust are two really important things. That's why even when someone like comes to your house, let's say you call someone, like we had to get something fixed at our plumbing. We had an issue in our basement, right? And
Yeah.
I don't know enough about plumbing. So when the person says this, that, and the other, I have at some level, like, either say, I have a choice to make, I'm going to go look everything you set up and verify, or I'm going to say, okay, right? Same when I go to my mechanic. That's even worse when they talk about car stuff. I'd have no idea what you're saying. It's all foreign language to me when you think about when a mechanic says that. So at some element, you decide in that moment, I'm going to trust what you're saying or not. And that's what I think we're constantly figuring out. Can I trust what you're saying or not? And are you giving me reason to not trust you, or are you giving me reason to trust you? And every time we are in a relationship dynamic, and again, I say relationship dynamic because we're not always in these deep relationships. Like I go to my mechanic, and when I show up and have my car, I don't need the same mechanic every time. Right, it's a different person every time. And hopefully I'm establishing a relationship with my plumber, right? That maybe over time I'll keep calling them because I trust them. But when you think about those mini relationships, those things add up, and we're constantly deciding, can I trust you? We have to be able to trust to move on with our lives, to do things at a baseline level. Then when you think about important decisions and bigger things, trust is even more of a factor for bigger things. It's things that we're scared about. Like I see this a lot when people come to talk to a therapist. It's a big step to sit down in someone's office and be like, I'm going to come talk to you. Like,
Yeah.
trust that you will keep what I'm saying confidential.
Yeah.
And that is one of the hugest things that I see in, in my field is
Oh,
keep things confidential. That's my currency, is confidentiality. I have got nothing if I don't have that. So I prize that above all, but that's, people are seeking. So can you see the difference between going to buy
yeah,
some, hoping it's not tainted, versus going to a therapist and hope they keep your confidentiality?
yeah.
That all those things still are based on trust.
Yeah. Now, listen, we're experiencing it right now. We're doing this great show. We're having a conversation of trust, and what? Emily is in the background. And what is Emily doing? We trust that Emily is going to say, when there's 45 minutes left, it's really 45 minutes. It's not 30, it's 45. So there's just this natural exchange that happens, right? Because we trust not only her competency, but we trust her as a producer. So these are one of these things that seem a little benign, right? It seems, oh, it's just a show. No, but if Emily happens to, she wouldn't ever, but if she happened to say 15 minutes left and there were 45, you and I would be speed talking, right? Just that one thing. Now, when we think about this and why this is important, can I ask you this question? In the world we're living in today, right? What I'm struck by is how much information we're bombarded with,
Oh, sure.
right?
What media outlets do we trust? It used to be we had 3 news channels. It came on at a certain time. It wasn't our news cycle. It also wasn't people on their phones reporting the news. Like basically you can look up someone saying, I saw this thing and I recorded it, right? And here's what I think. I mean, we have so many access points to information. And it's interesting, what news do you trust? What source do you trust? And how do you verify that? Right. And in a world where we in the olden days, like to say, we used to have to go to encyclopedias. That was our Google. We had to go
Yeah.
to a book that was already kind of outdated, and we looked it up, whatever the thing we wanted to look up, and then that's the access we had was so different to information. And now when we have like essentially a fire hose of information compared to that, it's just interesting to me, like, how do we learn to trust different sources of information when we only had 1 or 2 things to go to? Is very different. So this brings up in our society a lot, I think, the erosion of trust, because there's so much out there, and we have decision fatigue at some point, especially in that realm of information. Like what's a verifiable and trustworthy source, which I think
Exactly.
that is exhausting.
It is. And part of the exhaustion is not understanding the impact. See, why are we talking about trust? Because trust, like other things, but trust is one of them that's super important, has enormous consequences. When trust is just going along its way, really super cool, right? Just like, oh, yeah, there's no ripple, there's no blip in the matrix, there's no deja vu. We just continue to build. But what is it about trust that we hold it so high? Why do we hold it so high? Isn't the answer the consequences of mistrust? Isn't that what we're looking out for here a little bit?
Yes, because the consequences are so huge. We take it for granted when it's working, and when it's not, the consequences are really, they impact us on so many levels. How we feel about people, about ourselves, about a situation, about a product, whatever it is, it really impacts it. So a lot of times when we take trust for granted, we don't really think about it till it comes up. Or what I think too is, when you think of like work groups that are working well, you just assume, oh, this will stay well, or I hope it stays well. And I always like to say, hope is not a strategy. Like, I hope this stays. That's just not how you should operate. So the idea of, how am I intentionally, since trust is a big factor in success, how am I consciously and continuously building trust, keeping trust, earning trust, talking about trust, taking actions that build trust? What am I doing that doesn't just say, well, trust is here, should probably stay. Okay. Like, not doing that, because when you say the opposite, when trust is broken or eroded or taken away, it's hard the things don't work. People don't work in relationships where there's no trust. In formal and informal relationships, it's like the cornerstone that makes things happen. And so the idea of some of us think too, when it gets taken away or eroded or
Yeah.
broken, is trust given or earned? So then if I've done something to break your trust, Dr. Pat, in our relationship, do I have to earn it back? Is it possible? Or am I dead to you now? Or is it over? Like when we think about too, the trickiness of once trust is broken, do you offer me an olive branch or not? Or do we figure it out or not? Or is it just over? And
Yeah.
then what happens to our relationship because of it? That's why it's dire on this side. And why it's also, though, in our minds, easy to just take it for granted when it's working. So that's why I wanted to talk about it, because it's this, I feel like, invisible force that is so vital to effective, purposeful, thoughtful, successful relationships in all parts of our lives.
Yeah. And, let's just talk about this for a minute, because I want to just say what you described is what I referred to as different trusting styles. Trusting styles. I have a friend that, if my friend ever says you are dead to me, she wouldn't actually say that, but it's the same idea. Like if you ever get to that point with my best friend, it really is true. I mean, it is true. She may open a door for you to come back, but boy, you have to earn your way back. It takes a lot to get her to that point where she draws the line in the sand, right? I'm a little bit different. It takes a longer for me to even realize that I don't trust you anymore.
Right.
I'm like in la la land, right? I have more people point that out to me, and I just don't ruminate about it very much unless it's something really serious to me. In my research, there's a saying, the closer you are, the harder you fall. In this particular research on trust, and that is a tenet of trust. The closer you are, the harder you fall when mistrust happens. For example, if you're in a love relationship and a marriage, like that's a close thing, right? And if one of y'all cheat, oh, okay. So that is like a big owie, as opposed to, oh, like my table tennis partner didn't show up today. Okay. It's not the same. So there are different degrees. I want to ask you this. Why the bleep is trust so hard? Why is it so hard? I mean, does it hit all notes? I mean, clearly it hits the mental, the physical, the spiritual, and emotional, right? But what have you found? Look, you're a counselor, you're a speaker, you're a coach, you're many, many things. You help people get out into the world and speak. They trust you. What have you found along the way to becoming you? Get big out loud, Kari Knutson. What have you discovered about the difficulty of this?
I think that's such a great question, because the difficulty, I believe, lies in our own approach to trust, because you see people show up to trust in so many different ways and for good reason. So you can't just be like, if I believe one thing, everyone should believe the same thing. So like when I work with people, some people show up to trust in a way their trust has been broken, maybe from a very young age. Maybe they have historically not had relationships where they could trust other people or themselves. And so then they are building a life based on that premise of like, I can't trust anyone. And then notice the narrative, like, I can't trust anyone. And then things come up, we're like, yep, see, there's proof. And we tend to do that. We look for proof for everything we believe. So if we start off, again, maybe we start off for good reason. Maybe there were situations in our early lives where we couldn't trust, but then we continue that narrative and we don't extend trust. People have to earn our trust or prove it to us. We live our lives with that narrative, and that becomes difficult. The same way someone who grows up with maybe a lot of trust and good reason for that trust is in a safe environment where people are consistent and loving and true to their word, then you expect most things for me. I will have trust and relationships will be good, and it's easy for me to extend it. It doesn't mean it's better if it's easier for me or harder. It just is my experience. And so the great thing I think about being an adult is you can look back on your life and start to think about, where did I get ideas about trust? Right? Do I have trust issues or not? Where did they come from? And have they been reinforced through relationships that I currently have at work or at home or in my life? And so that's the beauty of being able to say why this is more difficult for some people than others is because it's more difficult for some people than others. It's not that trust itself is difficult. It's how it's been played out in our lives. So it's a good thing to reflect for yourself. Like, where did I get my ideas about trust, about my feeling of safety in the world? And when a lot of people go back to their childhoods, they can say to themselves, here's where the first time, I didn't trust somebody. Here's how this got reinforced. And then you can play out the narrative that helps. And then you ask the question, is that narrative still helpful to you now?
Yeah.
How are your relationships now? Like, is that, and then that's just an open question out of curiosity, not out of judgment. And
Yeah.
again, it's not the thing itself. The trust is just neutral. It's how it shows
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to just go check in with y'all about how's your trustometer? How's that working for you? Do you even know if one of the peeps in your life is like looking at you like different now, that they don't trust you as much anymore? Are there any signs of that? What if it's just a feeling you have? What do you do with it? Do you even know what you've done? Now, the place you spend most of your time is in the workplace and then sleeping. But in the workplace, trust in the workplace. It's at an all-time, let's just call it shaky. The earth is shaking beneath my feet in my workplace. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, Kari's going to walk us through what are the types of trust. Are there types? Should you know them? But before we do, how do people find out about you? How do they work with you? And tell us a little bit about how you coach people to help them be better speakers, better in public, take their dream out. How do you do that? Tell us how.
Sure. Well, you can find me at knutsonspeaks.com. It's KNUTSON speaks.com. And there on my website, you can find information about my presentations and my coaching and my show. And really, one of the best things I feel about public speaking is it allows me to talk about things I'm really passionate about. And then from there, people oftentimes want coaching, either individually or in small groups about the thing we talked about, or they want coaching on, hey, I want to be a speaker. Can you help me? And I think because of my experience being a speaker, I'm like constantly learning about how to be a better speaker, what works virtually, in person, for a pre-record, on a TED stage, in a meeting room, in a conference call. How do we show up? And so one of my lifelong loves is to help people find more confidence in themselves to show up in different venues and whatever way they want to be effective. So I've worked with a lot of people on very different kinds of public speaking. Like I said, from anything to running a meeting more effectively to being on a TED stage and literally everything in between. And it's thrilling for me because that's what I'm doing. And so it's great to be learning and teaching at the same time.
And when we come back, we are going to talk about the types of trust. But I wanted to say this to everybody out there. When we come back, we're going to be talking about how this weaves its way in to almost every aspect of our lives. Seriously. Not, you may be thinking it's just the biggest things in the world. It's just the biggest things, but it's not. When you go to the grocery store, I think, Kari, you mentioned this before, you go to the grocery store and you buy a piece of meat, you trust that care has been taken, or a quart of milk, or formula for your child. You trust that these things are working. You get on an airplane. You trust that the engine is not going to fall off like it did the other day. You trust that. Let's take a short break, everybody. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Yes, this is Get Big Out Loud. Kari Knutson does this show with me. I'm so honored to be able to do this because, Kari, from where you come from, you're looking at the multidimensional nature of human behavior and adjustments. And when we look at this, you're picking topics that we're most vulnerable at different points in time. And today's show is the currency of trust. But before we go to that one more time, can you let people know how they can find out more about you?
Yep. You can find out about me at knutsonspeaks.com. And all my information is listed on the website around speaking and my show and coaching and the work that I do. And I also like when people sometimes will just email me at knutsonspeaks@gmail.com and be like, I have a question, or I want to ask about this, or I want to follow up, or could you do this for my group or company? And I always love those kind of engagements too, because I do a lot of custom work for people around how I could be helpful in my services too. So that's always fun. So just reach out if you have a question too.
Look, I love this. Now, I want to ask you this. People may or may not know there are different types of trust. Let's break them down because these are very important distinctions, I think, right?
Yes. And I like the work of Patrick, and I never know how to say his last name correctly. Lencioni. I think it's Lencioni. But
that sounds great.
That sounds good.
Very, very Italian or something.
Yes. So he wrote the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He also wrote The 5 Functions of a Team. He talks a lot about teams and how they work. And I do a lot of work on team building and developing high performing teams. So I use his work a lot. And one of the things I love that he talked about was the 2 types of trust, one being predictability trust and the other being vulnerability trust. So what he says that I think is interesting about predictability is predictive. I have to say it the right way. But when you say predictive trust, what you're saying there is, okay, I believe you're going to do what you say you'll do. And because of our relationship over time, or the situation, like most times when I go to the store, the milk is good, I can buy it. I'm predicting that most times when I get on a plane, it works. So we predict based on our experiences that trust will happen. And that also, you're not constantly questioning what's going to happen next, because you can predict this person is usually like this, so they'll probably act like this in this situation. Like when I go to the doctor's office, I'm not like, what's going to happen today? I sit here, I check in, I get my 15 minutes, I talk about my stuff. Like we can predict when I drop my kids off at school, we can predict what's going to happen. And it's good because it's a little bit on autopilot, but the trust is built because things are consistent and they happen that way. So if you behaved a certain way in the past, I probably expect you to behave this way in the future. So I'm not constantly wondering, like, what's it going to be like? Okay. So when you think about predictive trust, a lot of us like live in that world. And then on the other side, another type of trust is vulnerability trust. And this is where things get harder, because vulnerability trust asks us to give something. It asks us to be vulnerable in situations. It asks us to extend trust and not necessarily have people earn it. And so when you think about vulnerability, what I like about this idea, in vulnerability trust, you know that trust requires vulnerability. So I just want to look at my notes real quick, but it's about when we decide to be honest with another person, it's a decision that we make to tell maybe a hard truth or to say something. It's vulnerability comes from a decision we make to be vulnerable. And I just wanted to make a quick caveat about this is a lot of times, especially now, and maybe it's because of my world in the therapy, public speaking, psychology world, a lot of people are like, be vulnerable, just be vulnerable, like be authentic, be vulnerable. And I'm always like, no. People get to decide about their level of vulnerability. And so when we say things like, if I said to you, Dr. Pat, this is a safe space, just say anything you want. You've had to be like, well, it's actually going out to a lot of people everywhere. I'm going to think about the venue. I have to think about my comfort with you, Kari, and also what I want to say. So don't you tell me, I'll actually decide how much of the space is safe for me. We have to give people that decision. And we can't just be like, be vulnerable, because sometimes it's not safe for us to be vulnerable.
Right.
And then we get burned and then we don't trust. And see, this whole thing, like forced vulnerability is not actual vulnerability. Yeah. So the whole idea about vulnerability trust is I make a decision to be vulnerable with you. And I own that, and it's the right time and space for me. And you don't tell me, I decide. And so that's the part that you have to make the distinction about.
Yeah, you're so right about this. One of the things you mentioned, I want to go back to it. It's very important. I was shocked when I did my research and then also my post research, and I'm getting ready to do another study. But what I found when I did this, my advisors, my committee, they were shocked when I said this to them. I went to them and I said, everything that I've done now on psychological contract, broken promises, there's only one book on integrity. There's only one book that was ever written on describing integrity. And so, of course, whenever you say that to a committee, they say, oh, good, add that to your list to study. So I did. And the reason I'm bringing up integrity, because integrity is engulfed in the biofilm of trust. It's like a little biofilm. And without the biofilm of trust, you don't have the eye. You have the little eye and you have the big eye. And so, one of the things that you're talking about, I was shocked that there was no definition. So I went and I asked people, I asked them what it was. And this is what they said. See if this matches what you just talked about. They said, one, you have to be accounting for doing what one says that you're going to do. That was 88%. If you say you're going to do it, you need to do it. That's trust. If I say I'm going to do this show, I need to be here. 88% of the people say if you're not going to be here, you're in trouble. You have to be trustworthy. We're going to talk about this now. You see, there's trust and then there's trustworthiness, and they're not the same. Then here it is. Be fair. What? What does that got to do with anything? Be fair. Show respect. Honor the dignity of others. You know, these are the things that people talk about. So I want to say this one last thing. This came from a company, this quote, that was, what do you call that? Chapter 11 or chapter 13? What is it when you go bankruptcy? Whatever the chapter is. Chapter something. This is what somebody wrote when I asked them about this. This was their reply. We don't cut corners. We don't sell seconds. We don't advertise fraudulently. We're going to do everything above board in compliance with rules and regulations. We will treat each other with respect and high regard, and every interaction should be of that nature. Everything and everyone will be treated in the same way. Address issues immediately and truthfully and honestly. Make sure everything is clearly communicated and clearly demonstrated. And so if you took that, raise your hand if y'all think you can do all those things. And the reason I'm bringing it up, because trust can hurt the heart. Mistrust can break the heart. Isn't this what you're talking about?
Yes. And the thing is, when you're talking, it's making me think about, it's not that things always go right? Things go wrong, things get miscommunicated, things don't go the way we planned. It's not that, like, if trust is there, then everything's always going right. It's our ability to manage when things go wrong that trust comes in. It's our ability to move forward when things aren't going right. Or whether it's like, if you and I have an issue, our trust factor plays a big role in how that issue is going to get resolved.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we don't have an issue. It just means, like,
oh, no.
So, and it's a tall order, what you're saying. And I think it's good to make the distinction. Just because we have trust doesn't mean things are difficult or not hard, or we won't disagree, especially you think about family lives or work groups or anything. That's the nature of the human condition, is to have conflict and disagree, I think, because we are all so different. But the idea of, like, how things get repaired, how things get fixed, how we approach things, how we feel after them. Like in a trusting relationships, does the best idea win or the best person win? Right? In trusting relationships, do you keep bringing up over and over all my faults, or do we move forward together? Like, how we feel in a trusting relationships, resolving issues is the thing that I focus on. Not even what the issue is. It's almost like how you feel about it.
Yeah.
Bringing up.
I love that we're talking about this. Listen, let's just get really down into this for a minute, because part of this is trustworthiness. And trustworthiness is, it's not just trust. It's how much do I trust you? That's really, now I'm giving you my, don't look this up. You're not going to find this definition. This is me just talking to everybody. How much do I trust you? That's what trustworthiness to me. It's like my little trustometer, right? Now, I may trust you, or I may trust an event, or I know when I watch the weather in the Pacific Northwest, there's a 50-50 chance it's going to be correct, because we're living in a vortex here. But here's what the definition was. Its trustworthiness was reported, and this is by people in the study, as being able to count on something happening. Oh, how simple is that? How simple is that? What? Is it that simple? Yes, it is that simple, right?
Yes, I love it. And I love it as a way to just drill down. Can I count on this? Can I count on you? And if I can't, like, it's interesting to say, like, you were late before and you're not late. Like, but if you are late to something, could you assume more positive intent if you had a relationship built on trust than if you didn't? So it's not that you'll never be late. Like you're trying really hard, you're thinking about doing better, you want to, and then life happens, right? So the idea of like, can I count on you that it was going to happen? Most of the time I can. And when it doesn't, what fills the gap from then not trusting you? Do I get to say, oh, this happened one time, she was just late? Like, is it easier for me to forgive that than it is if we don't have trust?
Yeah. And look, this is across the board one of the most misunderstood and I think under researched academic research areas, but everyday people, they understand it. You and I, the people listening, we understand it. We know what it feels like, right? We know what it feels like to really trust somebody, right? You know what it feels like, right? I mean, there are people in our lives right now that we trust with I trust Linda with my life. I do. And I never thought I would have that. I don't come from a background. My dad broke every promise he ever made. I'm not kidding. I never thought that I would be at a place where trust would be so easy for me now. And I think that's the place we want to try to get to. But it does require, I'm going to ask you to talk about this, discernment.
Yes, I love discernment. I love it so much. It does. And this is the thing I want to bring up a little bit as an example, just so you can see this play out in the world. Notice how every play or movie or book has the reason it's interesting, or the reason there has to be some action that happens. And notice how when something happens in let's take I don't know, play, for example, you're watching a play. What I always like to think about is, what's the first moment in a relationship where there's a crack in the trust factor? Like, what happens? Is it something someone says or something does? Because that compels the action, right? Was it a misunderstanding? Was it overt? Was it covert? Like, what was it? But I always look for that. Where was the first crack in the trust? And when the crack is small, it's easier to repair. But as the crack gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it gets harder and harder. So when you think about this discernment, and also being discerning when we're using someone being late, for example, some people, like, I don't care if you're late. Other people, like, that hurts me to my core. Like, you just are disrespecting me, right? And so when we know how people take our actions, and we can be discerning with Kari, it doesn't matter that I'm late. With Dr. Pat, it matters a lot. So I'm going to be discerning about that. When I start to make a crack, if something happens, a crack in a relationship, I'm going to make sure that before it gets too big, I'm going to be discerning enough to know something's not right here. I need to repair it. Like this is a ridiculous story, but it's so funny to me now and my husband. But so I have a level of trust with my husband where, like, I'm like, I have these appointments, I'm going to these things, whatever. We don't ask, like, whatever. But one day he was looking at my calendar and he's like, who's Chiro? Chiro's on here like 3 times. What is this about? And it was funny because I thought, he's never asked me anything, but he saw Chiro on there. He doesn't know what context it is, right? And he's like, is this a guy? Is this somebody? Like, what is this about? And the way he asked it made me giggle, because Chiro is my abbreviation for chiropractor. But he took it as some person's name, right? And that little bit of, like, I thought, thank God, instead of just being like, she went to go see some Chiro guy and had the guts to put it on her calendar right in front of me, and she's cheating on me or whatever with Chiro, right? So now we call Chiro my lover. We're like, I'm going to see Chiro. We could make fun of it, right? But we had a relationship where he could say to me, what's this? And I didn't be like, you don't have to know everything about me and whatever. Like, so you think about that discernment in relationships, that you can say like these things. And I feel like discernment is my word for this year, because it's showing up all over the place for me. And you have to engage your discernment in all kinds of relationships. And you decide, like, how much do I trust? I will also add this. If you are in the category of people that show up with, I don't trust anyone, and here's why, you have to then open your mind in a way to be like, can I, if I want to make progress in some parts of my life, be more discerning? Is it safe for me to trust now?
Yeah.
And if you're a person who just trusts everyone all the time and then you've been burned, it's good for you to be like, what happened in those situations? Can I be more discerning about how I extend trust? Again, it's not one size fits all, and it's not like here's the answer to trust, but we do know trust is paramount to things that work, and is paramount to fixing things that are broken.
Yeah. I wanted to stay with this for a minute because I want folks to know that not all broken trust hits us painfully. And I want to say that there are things that happen which fall in a middle range. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what those things are. We're not going to agonize. We're not going to lose sleep. We just are now have a new level of awareness. I have a client that I've worked with for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And I noticed a pattern, but I never thought this pattern would hit me, right? I knew this, but I never thought it would get to this point. And so sometimes when you work with people, they either get impatient, they don't tell you, and all of a sudden they make a decision that they're either not going to do something with you anymore, or they're going to do something different out of the blue. And so you have to have a level of predictive ability to scan your environment so you know the field that you're stepping in. And this is an important part of discernment. It's another discernment factor. It's the one we don't talk about enough. There's nothing wrong with what the person did. This is a client. We follow what our client. However, the impact of me not being prepared for it, that's my bad because I saw it. The impact is it cost months of work and today may impact some of the other partners that I brought in to finish the job. This is the kind of thing where you're in the day-to-day doing, whether it's your job, whether it's your children, whether it's the PTA meeting. This is a different level of skill you need to have to prepare yourself. I'm not saying this person's good, this person's bad, but this is a level of exchange that is so unpredictable sometimes in trust.
Yes, it is a level of exchange. And the only person you can control is yourself in those moments. So that's why if you know yourself and you can trust your own intuition about, do I feel right about trusting this person or not? Or what level does this
What level?
Is it all or nothing? Usually it's all these multi-levels, like from somebody was late and made me mad to someone like lied about, I don't know, my tax return or like didn't do my whatever it would be. I'm trying just to think of ideas, but like there's different levels for sure. And knowing that in life, the only person you can actually control is yourself, it is important to show up to those relationships to think about, how am I building trust, earning trust? Why do I trust or not trust this person? What's going on? Could I repair some trust? If I told them something about like, hey, this would work better for me if you did this, it would help me trust more. So sometimes we expect people just to magically know what they could do. And I feel like sometimes it's okay to say like, here's why I felt like the trust was broken. Like I remember I had a conversation with a friend in grad school one time, just saying like, when you told so-and-so something I said to you in confidence, like it really broke my trust. And I don't want to feel that way about you. Do you know that you did that? Like, do you know, why did you do that? Like, can we talk about it? And they were mortified, right? Because it was, to them, was a simple comment, but then it got back to me. And then I was all, and that's how gossip and hurt feelings start. But I'm so glad I didn't let that friendship go just because I'm like, well, now you're dead to me. You gossiped about me, and now this is like, that sometimes we do that, right? So
yeah, we do.
We're the only person we can control. We don't know how things are coming up. Like that person felt so bad. They had no intention of like, I didn't mean to break your trust. I'm like, well, you did. And I want to say, please don't do that again. Because I want this relationship to stay strong. And if I think you're doing that, it's going to be hard for me. And that was a great conversation that helped our relationship because it helped her know this is really important to me. And I won't function well in a relationship where that doesn't happen. And we probably won't have one. But instead of just being, that's it, you're dead to me, I was like, let's talk about it. Because I need to let you know what you're doing.
Yeah, I saw that in a movie over the weekend. Yeah. And, this is a really great conversation because, here's the silly thing. I need to do a better job. Linda's staying with me. Thank God. I hope she never goes home. But, I watch weird things on television because that's my escape. Linda does a puzzle. Funny is story. So I'm watching like this damsel show, like with your dragon and stuff. This is what I watch before I go to bed. And Linda's like, holy crap, I am never going to get to sleep. But yet last night she says, help me with the puzzle, help me with the puzzle. So I'm pretty good at puzzles, but I don't like to do them. So I help her with the puzzle. She doesn't sleep because I'm watching Damsel. I don't sleep because all I could see is the puzzle and me trying in my dreams. And what has this got to do with trust? What it has to do with trust is we can have a conversation about it. She may understand why I can't help her with the puzzle at 10 o'clock at night. And I clearly understand not to put Millie Bobby Brown, or I can't get her name right, and Damsel on TV as we're going to sleep. So these are the kinds of things that we just take for granted, but all of it adds up. That's what I want you to really comment on in closing. It may not be one big thing. It may be a thing. Like right now, I have to, after this show, I got to get myself on Amazon and I got to order snacks for my team because I told them I would.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But what was the thing? Say it again that you said the definition. Doing what you say you're going to do, showing up when you say you're going to show up, like the baseline level
Baseline
is accountability, right? It's having integrity, like you said. So accountability, integrity, discernment, all these things that we're talking about, think about those, how big buckets those things are. And then how trust, I feel like, is this umbrella over all of them. And it's almost an invisible umbrella that we take for granted. But when things are working, it shields us, it helps us, it protects us. And when things are not, it gets blown all to bits. Yep. So it's so vital to have a conversation around trust. And I would do almost what I like to think about is too, a trust audit. When things aren't working, like, what areas of my life is trust not really there? What relationships are not, and why? And how am I deciding? Am I withholding it? Do I making someone earn it? Am I even telling them how they broke it? Do they even know what to do to make it right? So like a trust audit can be really helpful in thinking, especially when things just aren't going on in a relationship or things aren't feeling right, or things that even when you engage with different, I don't know, contractors or people that you want to do business with, and you say,
not so much. Yeah. Thank you, Kari. Thank you for this. I know we're just scratching the surface on a very, very big topic. And I know this will come up again as we continue to move forward. What's your personal message? What would you like to leave us with? And please let us know how we can get a hold of you.
You can always find me at KnuttsonSpeaks.com and reach out to me there. All my contact information is there. And the closing information the closing message I'd like to leave you with is, if you do anything from this talk today, I'd like you to just sit with the idea of trust in your life and where did you get it? Where'd you get your idea? Was it over here and like, I can't trust anybody, myself or the world, or like I can, and the world is a safe place and I can trust in other people? And then ask yourself, how's that working for me now? And do I have opportunities to shift how I'm thinking about trust? And would doing a trust audit help me in my life to either, put a boundary around certain relationships that aren't working well, repair others, or move on from things, or rekindle some, or even build new ones. So that's the whole idea. We run on the currency of trust. And I want you to have a big bank account of your trust. And that's my goal for you, to think about that.
Yeah, make that trustometer go up the charts. Kari Knutson, give out your website one more time, and thank you for a great show.
Thank you, Dr. Pat. It's www.KnuttsonSpeaks.com. It's KNUTSON speaks.com. You can find information about presentations, coaching, my show. You can get in touch with me, and you could just send a love note if you want, whatever. I'm there. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear from you.
All right. Kari Knutson, I'm Dr. Pat, everybody. For more information about us, go to unlimitedpossibilitiesnow.com or thetransformationnetwork.com. Pretty soon, we got some new juicy stuff for you. Thank you all for tuning us in. Thank you, Emily, for pushing the right buttons. We'll see you next time.
You have been listening to Get Big Out Loud Radio, where we explore the complex, funny, and beautiful ride of life with me, Kari Knutson, joining Dr. Pat live every second Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com. I will help you to know which thoughts are keeping you small in order for you to get big. Get big and live your life out loud. For more information, visit KnuttsonSpeaks.com.